This video, we're going to record the Metasploit Armitage attack to show the policies for securing your network. And so we are going to download this document. You are going to, while it's loading, we are going to turn on the internet firewall, and we're going to turn on the pfSenseNet, and also we are going to turn on Meta-E and Windows 2003 and Windows 2012 R2. We are going to also turn on the Meta-E, but let's go through some overhead, some prerequisites for the lab. Now for this lab, what we're going to do is, the objectives is to familiar with the vulnerabilities assessment procedures from reconnaissance, which means to form the attack policy strategies, and go through the scan of the port, enumeration to search, to gather information, search for the vulnerabilities, and then use that to exploit the vulnerability to launch the attack. So those are the procedures for compromising, for doing the vulnerability assessment. And now we are going to then use two exercises to practice how to defend your system by going through the procedures of launching the attack. So put us in the shoes of the attacker, and then get familiar with how the system got compromised. And then we can develop a defense in-depth policy to deploy that, to mitigate the attack. Of course, the first one is to launch the vulnerability assessment procedure from the same inside network. So 70% of the attack is from the inside network, according to some reports. So we're going to first, and it's much easier to launch an attack from the inside. Then we're going to launch the same attack to do the vulnerability assessment from the outside, and going through the internet, through the security appliances to achieve the same attack. And then we will mitigate all those attacks and achieve the goal of understanding and the deploying, understand the concept of defense in depth, the DID concept. So we are going to use first the inside to inside attack. We will use the Kali to launch the attack using the GUI interface Armitage here. With the GUI interface to perform the scan, enumeration, and exploit to take over, and pivoting to take over the Windows 2003, 2012 from the vulnerable box of the 3, and we'll jump into a more patched, more secure system. And if you have a 2016 in here, they will be able to hop over to even the 2019. So if you have one of the weak link, then it can be pivoted into that. So we're going to show you this concept. And now to move Kali from outside to inside, we have two parts in this exercise. Kali usually has outside, it's in the internet to attack through the pfSense, and then access the internal box. We are going to first illustrate, just use the same network attack, and then move towards move the Kali to the outside to form a more sophisticated attack. So highlight the Kali and go to the snapshot and look at the snapshot manager. And you can click here. This is where I actually create a snapshot and move it to here. And it says moved from the inside to the outside, 10, 10, 10, 44. So actually the current Kali is on the outside. And in here, it says move from the outside to the 10.01.44. So we are going to right click and we are going to actually double click here and say yes. So once we say yes, let's go back and take a look at your snapshot and look at the snapshot manager. We already moved the Kali actually to the inside to become 10.01.44. So the image of the Kali, once we put it up, it will be inside. In addition to that, we have to move the NIC card. So if we right click here, and let's take a look at the settings. Okay. Now, and you click on the network, you're going to say that, okay, it's VM2 host, which is the inside. I already moved it. Otherwise, it would be on VM8. So when you first log in, if you take a look at this one, it's set it to on the outside, and it's selected the VMware number 8, the outside interface. So it's already been done for you. All we have to do is click the snapshot to move the Kali box from outside to the inside or vice versa. So once that is done, we can actually power on our Kali. Start the cast. Copy it. Right. Now from the Windows 2012 R2 here, I'm going to download this file. So click this file to download it. And then let's open it. So once you record it, once you download it, it will be download to your download folder, and you can just drag it out to your host, the Monsec VMware host, and then you can open it from the Monsec VMware host. For the read-only, so let's open it up. So I can move this document in and out to show you an unblocked view of the demonstration. So this will be the document that we are going to work on, and I already talked about the lab objectives. We are going to go to Kali, and you choose the number 2 to move from the outside to the inside. So now we are in the inside. Power on the Kali and use a terminal window, and then you can execute a command, the etc init.d, and then run the SQL software to actually start the services. Right, so I'm going to put this on the side, and we're going to first let me just close this one. We're going to reduce it. We don't need this anymore. We're going to go to Kali now, and the user is root, and password is changeman. So once it's up, we are going to start an Armitage. So let's take a look at this terminal. And according to the handout, you're going to run etc init.d. The SQL database, start. And once it's up, you can actually highlight the Armitage here. Move your mouse on top of the one with the green hat, and you just click it once, and you just say connect. Don't click more than once. Okay, so sometimes you open it multiple times, there's some issues. Start the Metasploit, yes. Yeah. Then the Kali GUI will be ready in a few minutes. While it's starting, let me just load a Word document for you to see. So this is what we have done. We go ahead and power on the Kali, run the command to start the database, and then run the GUI to get it ready to go through the scan, enumeration, and find attack to assess the vulnerability, and then exploit the vulnerability to launch the attack. So first we're going to do is the window pivoting. So we are going to scan the 2003 server and take over. And then from there, we are going to follow this instruction here to launch the SMB attack. And then launching, once we take over that, then we are going to do an op scan to find the host on the network. And then we will launch the PS exec to take over the 2012. I didn't have a screenshot here, but once we do the demo, you will be able to see that. Okay, so I'm going to move this box out and launch from there. First, we have to add a host. So you can click on the host here. You can say you want to add a host. And we know that's a 10.0.1.3. So that's 2003 IP address 3. 2012 IP address is 12. So we're going to add 10.0.1.3 first. And when it's added, we can right click and we can do the scan here. It's very important you let it finish all the scan. So you will tell it at the end, it will say scan complete. Okay, some of those scan, once it's complete, it doesn't count. If it says scan complete in how many seconds, that means you really already are finishing your scan. Okay. Then you're going to click on attack. Once you finish the scan, you can say, hey, find an attack. And it's going to search and see what kind of attack it has and tell you that, hey, happy hunting. All right, then once you right click it, you will see that the attack now is available. And we're going to go to the SMB attack. So you highlight attack and you move it to the SMB, and you will select the MS067 attack, just like the screen has shown. And here, this is the, you don't have to document it. It's actually have a screenshot, tell you click on the location to launch the attack. All right, and then we have a few things to, a few parameters we need to watch out for. All right. Now you can, as you can see that we have it in there. You can use a reverse connection. Click that, click this, just like the screen has, the document has shown you. And in here, you are going to make sure that we actually helping it with a little bit to choose that it's the 2003 service pack 0. All the system got, if they got patched, the vulnerability is no longer there, whether it's the 2003, 2012, 2019, the same thing. If they have vulnerability, follow the instruction, and they are not been patched, and they will be compromised. Okay. So once we select that, then you are going to say launch the attack. Then after a while, you can see that, hey, you already got taken control of. So the system's already been compromised. One of the things you have to watch out for is here. There is an R host and there's an R host and L host. Local host is your Kali, and R host is your victim. Okay, so make sure that in the R host, we didn't actually show advanced option. If you show the advanced option, you will see that in the attack from outside of the internet, then you will have to punch it in and make sure that we choose the correct R host and L host. From the inside attack, Kali automatically figure it out. Its own IP address is L host. The target host, the 2003, the 10.01.3 is the remote host. So we don't have to worry about that part. And now we are going to have to, once we launch the attack, we are going to exploit. So after we've done that, we're going to highlight the host and go to the interpreter, and then take a look at the access. We want to gain access to it. And then we're going to say we want to dump the hash, and we will choose the registry method. Okay. So this is also been documented in there in your handout. And once we do that, we're going to say launch. And we can actually take a look at the advanced option here. We click that. This one, it doesn't actually show you much of that. So we just go ahead and launch it. And you can see that, all right, it's dumping those password hash into here. And we have quite a few users already been there. And you can see the 500 is the administrator's ID number. So we already have the hash. Now we are going to use that hash to actually pivot it to other boxes. Now we're going to do an interactive command prompt. So again, you're going to highlight this box again, right-click, and then look at the interpreter again. And then we're going to this time go to interact, and then we're going to get a command shell. Okay. So once you click, it's going to show you have a new command shell here. So this is in a C drive. You are on the 2003 system over there. Now we're going to try to find out what is the domain name so that we can actually associate a password with the domain name. So on your handout page 8, it shows you the syntax on the box, and you have to type in exactly the same as it's in there. It's the system info, okay? Space, and then with pipe, and then you're going to say FINDSTR, find string, space, slash capital B, space, slash C drive, and then colon and double quote, type in DOMAIN and double quote. All right. So it's like this, and it's in your handout, similar to here, similar to that. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. Don't forget there are spaces in between the command. And once you hit enter, you're going to see that, hey, there's ncl.com. So the domain name is called ncl.com. And then now we recorded the domain name, and now again, we are going to do the pivoting attack. So we are going to highlight this one, right click, and go to the interpreter one again, and then there's a pivoting, and we are going to set it up. So click on the setup, and well, the internal network is actually 10.0.10. So we just add a pivoting into it. Okay, so the route has been edited. And once we add it, we are going to perform the op scan. So again, we are going to right click on the compromised box here. And then we're going to Metasploit again. And this time we're going to do an op scan. I'll send out a broadcast scan and see, hey, who's there? And you can see that, hey, this one has already been added in. So we do an op scan. So whatever is in the system there, they're going to find it. Okay, we do have a 10.01.2, which is a Meta-E, and we do have 1.12, which is Windows 2012. And this is a Kali yourself, and this is a PF sense. So everything is kind of listed into the database of this Kali system. And now we are going to compromise the 2012. So you're going to highlight the 10.01.12 here and right click. And then again, we are going to scan it. And this time we have to wait until it finishes the scan, just like before. So you can see that it takes a while for it to finish the scan, and you can see that actually the port 445 it's been open for 139. Those are the BIOS port. In order to secure a box, we should close all these ports to minimize the attack surface. But once we compromise one box and you use the legitimate username and password, even if you patch it, it will be still able to pivot it over to the system box here. So you highlight this one and you're going to right click and you say, hey, I want to log into this box. And I'm going to use the PX exact, that's on the second one. And now we have to tell them what do we want to use. We want to use administrator password. And all the hash has been put it in there. And it's not work group. We recorded it's actually mcl.com, right? And then, well, we can use reverse or not. It really doesn't matter. We're going to launch it. And it's going to exploit the vulnerabilities. And it should be able to take over this one by hopping through here. And at this point, this system box has been compromised. And we can go to the 2012 here. If you have loaded the curl port or process hacker, then we actually can see that you get connected. But if we didn't actually do that, you can, let's see, go back to 2012. Well, it's already locked, so let me just Control-Alt-Delete to get in. Change me. Now, once in there, let's go to the command prompt quickly. We can just do nested-an to see. You can see that established from 10.01.44. You actually already established a connection to the 12 into here. So you know that this one connection that's already been the only connection that's established actually is by the Kali. Okay. So if you go to 2003, that will be the same thing. You will see the compromised box have a connection in there. So we have completed all the way to page 11 here. And of course, if you wanted to kill the process and then take a look at it, a more graphical user interface, you already know how to do that. You can, of course, you have to download it ahead of time while you log on to the canvas. You can actually, or you can go to the internet to download the process hacker, or you can download the curl port to do it. So that's like a review, and I'm not going to do that in this video recording. Now we're going to go to the Linux box to do the reverse shell exercise. And this exercise is going to compromise the Meta-E box from the Kali that we just did. It's going to compromise the the meta E in here and then create a backdoor for the once it's been and uploaded a file into the target host. We're going to create a reverse shell, the file, the executable file, and we are going to move it into the meta E box, and we're going to use. You see that the L host is not 10.01.13, as I explained here. If we use a mount set box in the classroom, it's 10.01.13, but we are using the Horizon VMware. The Cali's IP is 10.01.44, so you are going to see 10.01.44 here instead of 1.13. The L host is the Cali box, and the local port, let's use 4444, so you can easily identify when the reverse shell got executed on the meta E and come back. So what happened is if we disconnect ourselves from the meta E and the meta E log off and log back in, we put a batch file in there into the logon process on the profile of the administrators. So once the meta E log in as an admin, it will come back and reconnect it to our Caddy box. Okay, that will be the first part of the exercises. And of course, we have to listen to it. We have to put ourselves in the listening mode and waiting for the remote boxes to log in and log out from the victim system, which is the meta E. And then the reverse shell will be reconnected back into our Cali box in there. And of course, you can actually take a look at the connection by issuing the command of using the sudo netstat-tpn, or you can use ps-ef pybit, grab whatever the shell to see the PID, and then you can do a sudo kill of the PID number to disconnect. And of course, in the PF sense, because it's a firewall, we can actually take a look at the connection that's going through the firewall later. This is the later part, second part of the video I'm going to record. That's going through the firewall, so then we can mitigate it. Okay. So I'm going to move this document on the side. Okay, so we are going to highlight this 10.01.2 and we're going to scan it. And again, it's very important that we wait until the scan is complete. Otherwise, we may produce some unexpected result. Okay. So you can see that the meta is designed for you to do a lot of assessments. So it got a lot of ports open. All right. And one of the exploit that we're going to do is the FTP backdoor that was built in for the testing purpose. And you have to make sure that you wait for it to finish all the scanning. Okay, scan completed in less than a minute. And now you're going to highlight it and highlight this box and tag, and we can find a tag. Right clicked and attack FTP, and you're going to find the backdoor of the 234. All right, and now here you can see that your Cali is the local host 10.01.44, and the remote host, the victim, is 10.01.2 in there, and it's FTP port 21, and we're going to launch on that. All right, so let's reconfirm on the screen here. You can tell this is the document. Let's put it in here. Make sure that you know this is 10.01.44 instead, and you can use the reverse connection and make sure that make sure the session is open. Okay, uncheck use a reverse. So there's nothing checked in here. Click the launch and make sure that the session open. So and make sure all the IP address is correct. So I'm going to move this document away from the screen. So we're going to launch it. Well, L4 here, if you wanted to make it more visible in here, we can change that to 4444. So it's making it easier to identify that. All right. So once you launch it, we have to wait for it to exploit it, and then it will be compromised. Okay, once it's been compromised, then we can go to the Meta-E here. So Kali, we have to go to Meta-E. And hit enter a few times, and you can see that Meta-E, the logon name is MSF-admin, MSF-admin, and MSF-admin. So when you do that, you can do a sudo SU or super user and MSF-admin, so you don't have to do sudo all the time. So in here, you can do nested-tpm. So if you do that, you can see, oh, okay, established from the first line. Tell you that, hey, it's 10.01.2 from the 10.013 to connect, because we actually use pivoting from a 10.013. So instead of showing the 10.01.44, it actually show you what's that one. So we're going to do ps-ef type grep, right? And then you can see that it's the shell command. So so you can see that you got the MSF-admin, and you actually have this the ports. The last line is actually the shell command that we do, and you can tell that the port number the port number 4444 didn't show up because it's from the Kali box to the 10.01.3, and from there we pivoted to attack the port 21, and it got established that way, and they're using different port number. Okay, so now what we will do is we are going to go to, and you can hold Control Alternate key to move your mouse out of it. And now we're going to go to Kali. Okay, so what we will do is we are going to stop the attack. So you can say okay, so what we will do is we come here and we go to the shell, and then we say, hey, we want to disconnect. So we disconnect it. And now if you go back to your Kali here, go back to your Meta-E. So if we do another TPM, and you can see that, okay, close wait, the connection established is already gone because the attacker is gone. So I'm going to show you direct launching the attack. So you can monitor the attack more in a direct way instead of going through the 10.01.3 to pivot it. Right? So what we will do is then we are going to go in there, and then we actually just exit it out from the Metasploit here, and let's just get out of this connection. All right. So then now we're going to again launch the attack directly. So now we are going to right click here, and we're going to launch the attack, FTP again. All right. So we're going to go to the 234 attack, and it's from 10.01.44. So let's just launch the attack. And it's going to compromise it. Okay, so it got compromised again. So we going back to Meta E here, and you do an up arrow key. You click to put the focus there, and we can see, okay, got established that 10.01.44 actually established that. And it's actually at a PID of 5351, the second one. So we can say, hey, I want to kill PID of 53, 51. So once we do that, you can see that in the Kali here, Kali currently still have that compromised. And in the Meta E here, if we hit enter on that, and you can quickly go back to your Kali here. And well, it's no longer connected. So what we will do now is we are going to launch the reverse shell. So once we launch the attack again in here, we are going to say, hey, we are under the shell here. We want to interact. So it's going to open the command shell here, like in here for you. And if you do an ls, you can see there are some file in that pwd. What is my current folder? It's under root. Okay, so you know the location of where your shell is located at. Now we're going to generate a reverse shell. So you're going to go to the payload here, open it up, and it's under payload Linux. So look at the Linux here, open the Linux, and then it's on the x86. Okay. Once open the x86, it's under shell reverse TCP. We can actually push it a little bit here. It's called shell reverse TCP. So right here. So if we take a look at this, yeah, it's 86 and in here. So on here, what we will do is then we are going to double click here, and then make sure that the port, double click here. We can use 444 to do that, and ELF for the file format. Okay. And remote is, of course, 1.44 in our exercise. Launch, and under the root is okay, or you can put it into the root or different places. Under the root is fine. So we just go ahead and give it a file name, and we can call it reverse shell, RS 4444, reverse shell 4444 ports. Go in and we save it. So once it's saved, Now we are going to upload it. So you're going to come here and right click, and you'll go to your shell 6, and you're going to upload. And click on the upload, and we're going to highlight the one that we created, the reverse shell, and say open. Okay, so once it's been uploaded to here, and you can see that there's some file here. If we do another ls, click in here, ls, and you can see that. All right. Okay, the RS4444 has been uploaded now. Okay, so then there are a few Linux syntax. I need to go through that with you here in the document. What we will do is we are going to move this file RS4444 and then go to the USR band setup .host, and we'll again chmod to make it executable for this file that we move to. And then we're going to echo. Those are the commands that we used before. This file, ampersand means run as a process and put it into the profile. So when next time when MSFM log in, it will be executed. All right. So we're going to issue those commands. So we're going to type it in mv space, and we're going to do RS4444 space, go to USR then, and we call it setup.host. All right, and then we're going to do chmod 755 USR then setup.host. So once we chmod it, and we're going to echo quote setup.host end quote, and append it to etc/profile. Now, if we cat etc profile, we can see that the last line here, the setup the host, has been appended to it. All right. So now, if we come here, you go to the Meta-E here to, of course, if we take a look at the connection again, and you can see you got one established, right? Now we are going to go to Kali, and we clicked in the under shell, and say, hey, I'm going to disconnect. Done. I'm done with it. So no longer connected. So now you're going to go to the Meta-E and up arrow key. The establish is gone. So now let's log out. Or we can do exit, I believe. Yeah. And exit. For a login, MSF ADMIN. Okay. And MSF ADMIN. And of course, we're going to take a look at the Kali. Kali, of course, there's nothing happened yet. We come to Meta-E and we log in. And once we log in here, then we're going to take a look at the Kali. So the Kali is supposed to, oh, we didn't listen to it. So we have to go listen to that. So in the Armitage here, we are going to listen. So there's a listener, and we are going to reverse and wait for. And we set up port 4444. So we're going to listen to that, and it's a shell. So we're going to start listening. So once we are listening, now we are going back to Meta-E again. So we're going to pick it, click that, click it, and MSF ADMIN, MSF ADMIN, sign on. Okay, exit it out. And we go to Kali. now you got compromised. Okay, so let's move back here. So it actually coming back to reconnect, and you can use the nested.tpn to look at that, and you can see the reverse shell got reconnected back. So that concludes this local to local vulnerability assessment. Now, the next video, what we're going to do is we are going to go through the outside internet. So will be the Meta-E here, and then attack from the outside going to the inside. And we would look at the pfSense involvement with the security appliances before the between the attacker and between the Meta-E victim on that. And of course, there are a few mitigations we're going to play with it. But I would like to go through the conclusion here for this first part of the video. The defense in depth, it is a defense mechanism, a system against the attack. So we will put a layers of independent method to actually protect the data and information and protect our host. So if in case one didn't work, the other one hopefully can kick in and then mitigate dwarf the attack. Now at the host, what we can do is we can install the host-based IDS IPS, capture it, and then select an action to disconnect. And of course, we patch and update all the host information to the latest good copy of the software. And then again, if it's a web server or if it's any kind of service that we provide to the internet, if we don't provide the internet, we should close it so there's no attack surface. And if we provide services, then we make sure that we have also install the application-specific firewall to protect the application, in addition to the operating system and the applications patch. Okay, and in the firewall or security appliances, we can install the IPS and update the database and update the version of the software and tighten the access control list, which is what we will do in our next video. And then we only translate the minimum port to allow outside access. So you will not have more unnecessary attack surface. And again, do the penetration test, the pen test. And we can do it in-house, and we can hire the outside professional to perform the test because it will have a different view and a different from different angle to look at your security defense strategy. And then at the corporate itself, then you can, it's also very important. Now we should train the employee. That's the most important asset for any corporations. So we have to periodically train the employee, and we also deploy and enforce the mandate of the security, such as, hey, you have to change the password often, and password has to meet certain complexity requirements. And also you should develop, we should develop an instance response policy, which we will do in a few weeks. So when you have a breach, when you have an instances, what is our response? We don't get caught short without any policy in place. And then we're going to, of course, educate and educate the employees, and also we have to enforce the AUP, the acceptable use policy for the system. So with all that, we focus on the human part of the corporate, in addition to the technology side. So this is a very important defense in depth from all different aspects to make our system safer. So this concludes this part of video.